Now we move into the session of Data for Trustworthy AI. And before giving the floor to our moderator today, please allow me for a few words. So you heard in the introduction, our President Thomas Hahn talked about this data AI continuum, no? That is our kind of focus area in BDVA. So the community has been working in the topic of data for AI already for many years. And I remember actually it was in 2018, we organized many workshops with the European Commission, with many projects and members, just covering the topic of data for AI. And actually, thanks to all those workshops and activities, we produced road mapping for the topic. It was introduced in the Strategic Research, Innovation and Deployment Agenda, what is now the AI Data and Robotics Partnership. Now with the new, with Trustworthy AI, and now we move into ethical guidelines and the new AI Act, we start talking more and more about data for Trustworthy AI, and that's what the session will be covering today, and very important topic for the community. We have a luxury moderator as well. We have Jeanette Nilsson. Jeanette is AI ecosystem driver from RISE, Sweden. She's also a board member of BDVA. And also she's one of our representatives from BDVA in the EuroHPC joint undertaking in the RIAG, Research and Innovation Advisory Group. So thank you, Jeanette, and thank you to everyone. The floor is yours for this session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anna, and really nice to be here in Naples. It's so warm. I mean, I live in Luleå, and we have midnight sun and now 14 degrees. So maybe that would be something nice for next year, when Data Week, to have to be in a cool place and a light place. But it's super nice to be here. I love to be around the Mediterranean as a Nordic. Anna gave me a good presentation. In Sweden, I work with the Research Institute in Sweden. Is about 3,000 people. We are all over the country in all different disciplines. I work in a computer science department, working with artificial intelligence and trying to make it so demystify it. So I'm working with also the AI agenda for Sweden, where we have 60 different actors working together to see what can we do to really enhance the use of artificial intelligence. And to do artificial, it's such a difficult word to say, to do AI, you really need to have data. So I'm really looking forward to listen to all the great speakers in this session, and that we shall also have a panel. And the plan was to kick off with Thomas Hahn, who is president. He has been he gave a short introduction in the beginning and welcomed us, and he has done a great job. And he was going to set also the scene, but unfortunately, because we are live, we have some delays, so he couldn't make the introductory speech. So we will go directly to the second speaker today, and that's Sebastian Hallensleben, who is head of digital and AI at VDE. So please, Sebastian, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you above all for setting up the technology to add me remotely. Jeanette has just made the strong case for being in Naples. I would have loved to be there, but it didn't quite work out to squeeze not the presentation time, but to squeeze the travel times into the calendar. So thank you for the opportunity to speak and engage anyway. So I'll share my screen anyway to give you a broad overview of what we're actually talking about when talking about data in AI. And I'm looking at it very much from a standardization perspective. So I'm the chair of European AI Standardization at CEN-CENELEC, so leading JTC 21 for those of you who know the entity. And therefore, my perspective will not encompass everything because, as Jeanette just pointed out, the plan is for Thomas to set the stage as well. So you'll have one particular perspective from my side, and then hopefully the other participants can add the broader perspectives as well. So I'll just switch to a number of slides so that you can stop seeing me massive over life size on screen. And hopefully you should be able to see some slides now. So just following from the kind of introduction from Anna and Jeanette, I'm wearing many hats, and I'm showing that list of some of the hats not to impress all of you, but rather to show just how varied AI is, and in how many different contexts it plays a role. So it's in the context of my my employer, BDE, large technology organization in Germany, but also in the context of standardization at CEN-21, in the context of the OECD, which veers more towards policy making, and also in the context of Standardized IT and the European Observatory, where the focus is on certain consequences of AI. And this cross-sectionality is actually something that AI has got in common with data, and in particular with big data. And therefore, I think it makes a lot of sense to consider these cross-sectionality challenges, both from an AI and a data perspective, but also in combination of the two. Now, some of you in the room have to do with this picture day in, day out, so apologies to you. But for anyone who's not that familiar with how standardization works, I just like to show this brief reminder. So we have a bit of a matrix organization there in standardization. We have three pillars. The ISO pillar that deals with the majority of topics in standardization. The IEC pillar that deals with electrotechnical standardization, and the ITU pillar that deals with standardization in the area of telecommunications. And these pillars have regional and national levels as well. So for ISO, the European equivalent is CEN, and I'm showing here the German example, DIN. And for IEC, we have CENELEC at the European level and DKE in Germany. And for telecoms, we have ETSI at the European level and again, DKE in Germany. So DKE is actually under the same roof as VDE, it's part of VDE. So that's basically my organization, if you like. And for AI, it's actually quite difficult to allocate the topic to one of those three pillars, because is it an electrotechnical topic? Yes. Is it a general topic? Yes. Is it a telecoms topic? Yes. So it kind of fits everywhere. And so on various levels, there are joint structures that have been created. At the international level, in particular between ISO and IEC, that's Joint Technical Committee 1, Subcommittee 42. So 42, I'm sure, is not an accident, but comes from some avid reading of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. At the European level, we have JTC 21 as a joint activity between CEN and CENELEC, and there is also a so-called Mode 4 collaboration with ETSI on this topic. And on the national level, again, the German example here, there's also a joint committee that brings together all those pillars. So again, it underlines the cross-sectionality of AI in standardization as well, and the fact that it makes sense to bring those different pillars together. The second thing I'd like to point out in this picture is specific at the European level. So we do have a formalized relationship between standardization and regulation at the European level, encapsulated in the new legislative framework. This framework, first of all, defines a certain subset of standards, or provides for a certain subset of standards that specifically underpin European regulation, the so-called harmonized standards. And the framework also provides for the mechanism of standardization requests, where the European Commission can ask standardization organizations to create certain standards if they're missing but will be needed for specific pieces of regulation. And of course, this is actually quite topical in the case of the AI Act, where we're discussing the standardization request right now. So with that little background explanation, I'd like to zoom in on JTC 21 on AI standardization in Europe. This is one of the biggest or most high-profile standardization activities. We've got more than 18 countries involved, which I think is a record. We've also got well over 100 participants involved that have been sent by the national bodies of those 18 countries. And that's a good thing because we have a tight deadline. If we want to create standards that underpin European regulation, i.e. in particular the AI Act, they have to be ready before the AI Act comes into force, which we expect to happen in early 2025. And so we do have a deadline for standards development for autumn 2024. And apart from that, the JTC 21 mission is very, very straightforward. So what you see here in those three blue circles is the very official wording from the terms of reference, creating standardization deliverables for AI and its use of related data. So again, the reason why AI is on stage in the Data Week. Consider the adoption of international standards relevant to Europe. So basically, let's not reinvent the wheel. If there is something good already, something useful internationally, we just adopt it for Europe, either unchanged or in a slightly modified form. And also the reminder to address both European market needs and European societal needs, i.e. With a specific eye on fundamental rights and the overall objectives that we hold dear in Europe, maybe a bit dearer than in some other countries in the world. So because AI is such a cross-sectional topic, we do have numerous interfaces in various formats. And the ones I'd like to highlight are the last two bullet points. First of all, the so-called Annex Iii Organizations. So these are organizations that have been specifically named by CEN-CENELEC to be involved in standardization, even though they are not industry players. So that's ANEC for consumer concerns, that's ETUC for trade union worker perspective. There are also organizations for a small business perspective and for a sustainability perspective. And for AI, this is important because it is not just a purely technical issue or set of technical issues, but a lot broader than that. And we also have liaisons to initiatives such as Gaia-X and the Big Data Value Association. And in fact, we have a very, very good working relationship with BDVA. And I'd really like to thank both Anna and Thomas for their investment in time in making that collaboration active and fruitful, where we really see those organizations as the context in which standardization happens. And there is a strong need to make sure that frameworks, that concepts, that approaches that are being developed in organizations such as BDVA or Gaia-X find their way into standardization and are reflected there. So, having talked about structure for quite a bit, I'd like to give you a little bit of an insight into what is actually happening content-wise. This is a snapshot that formed the basis for discussion just 2 weeks ago at the most recent plenary session. And it gives you a rough idea on some of the issues that will be worked on in JTC 21. Some are already underway. On the top line, conformity assessment and language processing. Others are very close to kick-off being worked on. And then there's a whole raft of items and issues that are in the pipeline and where the work items are being prepared and defined right now. And I've highlighted, well, I sat down a few days ago and I thought, well, I'll just highlight the ones that have relevance for data, and that would be relevant to you in the audience at the Data Week. And then realized, well, in theory, I could make everything red because there is a connection to data in all those cases. In the end, I tried to limit it a little bit, but you can see that there are some very explicit items like the part of the standardization request on governance and the quality of data, but there are also some that have an indirect relationship with data to do with logging, with accuracy, with robustness, trustworthiness, transparency, and also human oversight. In all those cases, there are aspects of data handling to be considered as well. Things like versioning, accessibility of data, quality of data, supply chain issues, and so on. So the question is, well, how does this all fit into the overall picture of standardization? I'll go over this fairly quickly. So we have a top-down approach, a road mapping approach in European AI standardization to figure out what potentially needs to be done. In effect, it's a systematic gap analysis. And we also have a bottom-up track, which is the more traditional approach for standardization, where various national committees, various ad hoc groups look at a very specific topic and identify a standardization need, identify a gap to existing work. And the magic that needs to happen in JTC 21 is to weave those bottom-up and top-down perspectives together and come up with this catalogue of work items. And as I said in the previous slide, this is the process that is underway right now. So I'd like to conclude with this slide that asks a slightly provocative question. So what makes good European AI standards? I already touched on the first point, so no reinventing the wheel, use of ISO IEC standards wherever possible. It could also be standards from other organizations that already exist, have reached a sufficient degree of maturity. And this not only saves time, but it also makes the total set of standards that companies and other organizations have to look at later on as small as possible. Secondly, supporting innovation and competition. So a standard has to be actionable in our perspective. And this is actually a difference between the way that we approach AI standardization in Europe compared to the international level. If you look at the international level, a lot of the output so far has to do with best practice, has to do with providing overall frameworks, terminology, but they are not standards that you can test against or that you can use to operationalize certain metrics. And in Europe, we have a slightly different perspective in line with the way the stance that the AI Act takes, in that we want actionable regulation and standardization. So things like you can test against, that you can also enforce, that ensure a level competitive playing field, and that are also actionable in the sense that you can use them to guide your engineering decisions. You also want, of course, standards to be coherent with other standards and frameworks. I touched on that already. And we're also taking a strong horizontal approach. So at least in CEN-CENELEC, in line with the AI Act also being a horizontal piece of regulation. ETSI is coming from a slightly different perspective. The verticals are stronger in ETSI, so AI standardization there happens in the context of, or mostly in the context of certain verticals. And finally, what makes good European AI standards? Well, satisfying European specificities. So supporting the overall goal to protect citizens and consumers, to be consistent with the AI Act, and more broadly also to support the bigger strategic goal, which was formulated in February with the new standardization strategy of the European Commission, namely that the European Union should be a global standard setter, not just a standard taker. And in the area of AI standardization, there is a lot of scope for that, to build and create standards that are good, not only for Europe, but that can also set an example for a broader international stage. And with that, I would like to conclude my part and looking forward to the other presentations and discussions. Thank you.
Thank you, Sebastian. And if Thomas had been here, he would also have shown how BDVA has been working. You've been seeing it. Nuria talked about that, and Daniel also, and to see all how data has evolved over these years. So I think that would give a super good, perfect background for all your presentations now. Different perspectives on data, how data can make trustful AI. So first out is Michela Milano, professor from the University of Bologna.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so good morning, everybody. Thank you for inviting me here. And basically, I've been asked to talk about the AI on demand platform that is very important initiative that the Commission has funded starting in Horizon 2020, and that will go on for the whole Horizon Europe and also in Digital Europe. So the European AI on demand platform basically has been conceived as a one-stop shop for artificial intelligence tools that are European. And basically, at the moment, the project that has started this AI on demand platform that is called AI for You has just finished. But the Commission is planning to go on funding two different activities. One is a coordination and support action in Horizon Europe that is more devoted to the connection between this platform and the research community, while on the other hand, we have a preparatory action on Digital Europe that is meant to strengthen the connection between the platform and the industrial ecosystem and also the public administrations, for example. So what is there on the AI on demand platform? Well, there are many things. So at the moment, basically, there is a set of assets. So it's a container for AI assets. And with asset, I mean tools, but also courses, papers, experts. So all resources that basically can support the development of solutions of AI tools and AI systems. What is still missing is a very strong connection with data. So I think that really we need to pursue this line of this direction, because basically now on the platform we have very few data sets. So we really need to glue this platform with, for example, these European data spaces. But still, so there are many dimensions that are considered on the platform. So first of all, the research part, the industrial part, there are some services that are developed at the moment. And there is also this part concerning trustworthy AI. So the trustworthy AI part on the AI on demand platform is going to be enriched by, for example, the network of excellence that are working on this specific topic. So there is one network of excellence that has been funded by the Commission in Horizon Europe that is called Taylor, that is meant to develop and to create, research, but also tools and also, methodologies for taking into account trustworthy AI, all the dimensions of trustworthy AI systems. So the platform is now inserted into this European ecosystem, the European AI landscape that is quite, you know, quite complex in a way. But basically, you can see here the AI for You, that is the original project that has developed this AI on demand platform. And basically, around this platform now there are some initiatives that are this network of excellence that I was talking about just 1 minute ago, that basically are 4 network of excellence that are tailored on trustworthy AI, Elise that is more on machine learning, one is human AI net that is more connected to with human interaction, and one is AI for media that is more related to media technologies. And these network of excellence should provide content to the platform and also data sets that can be used and also made available for benchmarking, for example. On the other hand, around the platform at the moment, there are some ICT 49 projects that are innovation actions that are more devoted to either verticals or to the creation of services, additional services for the platform. So these projects are AI Plan for You, that is meant to enrich the planning capabilities of the platform. But with planning, I mean artificial intelligence planning tools. Then we have Bones Apps that is more devoted to edge AI. Then we have the IH for AI. So we have Sergio here that is the coordinator. So the connection between DIH and artificial intelligence. Then we have AI Energy that is vertical on energy, AI for Copernicus that is a vertical on Earth observation. And we have Starway that is a project that I'm coordinating that is meant to ease the access to the platform for small and medium enterprises that now see barriers in the uptake of AI. So basically, there are some current activities around the platform. So these, the research part is going to create and populate content. Then we have this innovation part that is going to make use and exploit what is on the platform. And also there are some services that are provided to in the platform. So beside this content, the set of this content management system that basically takes into account all AI assets, we have also developed an experimentation platform, which is a playground that can support researchers and developers to use and run experiments on the platform itself. So now, these are in fact the ICT 49 that are, meant to increase and enrich the services on the platform. And all these projects have open calls. So before, in the previous section, I've heard about, SMEs that are trying to understand how to, collect funds for developing their activities, and maybe with a lower burden with respect to the administrative part, because running a European project, we all know that is very difficult. So there are these open calls where the bureaucratic burden is lower, but still, they can support SMEs in developing solutions that can then be accommodated on the platform. And of course, around this solution, we also have data sets. So now let's see the trustworthy part. So on the platform now we only have a trustworthy AI repository, and all the ICT 49 projects that are developing and are developing the services on the platform are collaborating for creating a working group on trustworthy AI to make sure that the AI on demand platform can become a unique reference European reference point for trustworthy AI solutions, and also a kind of certification, even if we are very far from a certification, but still some kind of guarantee that some tools that are on the platform have some specific dimension and are coherent with some specific dimensions of trustworthy AI. So this working group is trying to create a shared approach for trustworthy AI assessment. So how to assess an existing system around the dimensions of trustworthy AI, and of course create a taxonomy like revision and extension of service, so that we can in a way integrate with this AI on demand platform. So now I have a personal opinion on, of course, this is what I've just said until now is something that has been pushed by the European Commission and is now carried out by, the research community and the innovation ecosystem. But basically, I think that for what concerns trustworthy AI now, we really need to kind of translate what these dimensions of trustworthy AI that have been devised by the high-level expert group that are like explainability, robustness, fairness, privacy, and accountability, and so on. So how these dimensions translate in practice is something that industry, many industries have no idea on how to do that. And I have to say also the research part is somehow quite, there are some difficulties in understanding and making these dimensions in practice. So I think that the Commission has really the opportunity to make this European AI on demand platform to be a unique reference point at European level. But there are two things that need to be done for me. So how to deal with existing systems. So how do we assess an existing system on the trustworthy AI dimension? How, for example, can we measure how fair is an AI system? And for doing that, we need to create some controlled experimental environments where we can really, play with some parameters and test how much and to what extent an AI system is, for example, fair. So, and for this, we really need to devise data sets that provide kind of benchmarks to measure and assess how, how much, a system is trustworthy along several dimensions. And for this, I think that we really need to work hard because these are still missing. Also, what happens if a system is not trustworthy and there is an industrial system, for example, that is used but is not trustworthy along some dimension? How to do that? How to repair it? And if we want to create a new system, so how to define software engineering guidelines that make this system trustworthy by design. And I think that really, coming both from the algorithmic side and the data side, we really need to, to push a lot of effort for creating such experimentation environment and make basically both the research and the industrial community able to assess the system or to design new ones that are indeed trustworthy. So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you. And we will save all the questions for after the all speakers. So, and then next speaker is Sergio Gusmero. Please, do you want to sit there? No, you're going to come over here.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Sergio Gusmeroli, Research Coordinator at Politecnico di Milano. And I'm here representing basically the Smart Manufacturing Industry Group in BDVA. I'm the honor of co-chairing it together with Davide Dalle Carbonare from engineering. And I'm reporting you about some activities that we are conducting in the domain of data for trustworthy AI. First of all, our group is open, and so you are more than welcome to join. At the moment, there are more than 120 members, and it is really a think tank where to exchange views and where to put new knowledge, newer experiences in the domain of data AI for manufacturing. And in the past, we published some white papers, and they are available in the BDVA website. What is the consideration at the basis of my short speech today? is that we have three main challenges this year for the smart manufacturing industry group, which are AI for manufacturing, data spaces for manufacturing, and digital twins for manufacturing. One of the common challenges that we could find in these three domains is quality. And in particular, the quality of the data, which are going to be used by AI, the quality of the data which are building data spaces, and the quality of the data which are mobilizing simulations, modeling of systems in digital twins. That's why we started to collaborate, because we are very well aware that we cannot do everything in isolation. And so the first collaboration that we had was with EFRA, with the Connected Factories CSA, and now, you know, is Made in Europe, the new partnership for manufacturing. And together with them, we developed this model, which is called the Data Space Pathway. And you see, you can recognize in the rows some of the technical challenges of our SRIA, of the BDVA Strategic Research and Innovation Agenda: data management, data protection, data processing, data analytics, data visualization, and data sharing. And then in the column, we identified 5 increasing level of maturity, in this case for a manufacturing company, in order to fully adopt the benefits coming from these technologies. Without going into details, but we identified 5 main levels. Level 1, where companies do not have any control on the data they produce. Maybe they produce data, because Industry 4.0 now is almost everywhere. And so they produce a lot of data, but they don't have awareness of the data they produce, because the data are locked. And they are locked into proprietary systems. They are locked into the automation systems, into the robotic systems, into the PLM systems, into the ERP system. So level 2 is to create a data, is to avoid the data silos, which means that we have data which are in these systems, but we need the level 3 data bridges. And data bridges are more or less one-to-one integration between data coming from different sources. But the next step is data interoperability through the adoption of open data models, ontologies, open standards, in order to make this systematic, and in order also to allow on-the-fly aggregations of data, on-the-fly interoperability of data, and not predefined one. And the last point is data valorization, and we also heard this morning about it. And so the main point is data of economic value for a manufacturing company? And this is something that manufacturing companies are not able to understand at the moment. And I've seen in this morning that somebody talked about putting the data in the profit and loss balance, and putting the data in the economic sheet of the company. And so data is really a value for the companies, and in particular for the manufacturing companies. And this is not fully understood. And we need to proceed in this direction in order to make a manufacturing company to become more based on data. And I have another slide which I'm not proposing here, where you see that manufacturing industry is in the less development sectors which use data for decision making. And so in banking, in insurance, in finance, you have that data are really used for decision making. In manufacturing, much less. And this is something that we should really work on. And we organized an interactive workshop with Mural, where we identified obstacles and challenges, future opportunities, and success stories. And these success stories came from 12 projects. And you see also the provenance of these projects, which are not just inside the BDVA, they are also inside the BDVA, but they also come from other different communities. And one of the major challenges and obstacles that they faced, they noted, was lack of data quality and the need of new approaches for data for AI. And this was the input also to another collaboration, a collaboration with another CSA, which is called OpenDI, which is coordinated by IDC. And this OpenDI is about a digital platform and how digital platform could affect our industries. And in particular, for the manufacturing industry, we provided the commission with this slide that was used by Matthias Quom, by an officer from the European Commission, in one of the introductory events to data spaces for manufacturing. And you see here that you have three main scenarios for manufacturing. Smart autonomous factory, that is the scenario of production and of network of production sites. The scenario of product service factory, which is not just PLM, it is not just to follow the products along their life cycle, but also to associate new data-driven services to these products, and this creates enormous business opportunities for the manufacturing industry. And then you have the hyper-connected factories, that is the evolution of the supply chain management in a more open value ecosystem of company. And then we have on the columns three main models that we will see afterwards, which have been identified by the Commission in a communication of 2018, which is open data, data marketplace, and trusted data network. And so the point is how can the manufacturing industry to get benefits from open data, from data marketplace, and from trusted data networks. And which are the incentives, which are the measures, which are the recommendations, which are the actions that we need to put in place in order to make a manufacturing industry more active in this data economy. And this is what we addressed on the 30th of May in an online section. And in this online section belonging to the Data Week, we invited some speakers about a matter of quality, data for trustworthy AI in manufacturing. And here I'm collecting some of these of the outcomes of this section. But if you want, the full report about the session is available in JAM in the repository, and you are invited to go there. First of all, one first approach was proposed for smart autonomous factories. And so the point here is mostly how to increase and how to measure the quality of data coming from the plants, from the production plants, which are mostly, in this case, not exclusively, but mostly industrial IoT data. And the AI Regio project proposed through Nena Stojanovic from Nisatec, an approach which is an approach based on data pipelines. And in order to have also an AI-driven process analysis, data preprocessing, in order to prepare properly the data to a further AI analysis. I'm not going into details, but this is one of the results of the project. You could recognize a tool, which is Apache Slim Pipes, and we have added the pipeline elements and the pipelines in order to perform data preprocessing pipelines for manufacturing industry. You will have at the entrance of the flow, you have data, mostly stream data coming from industrial IoT. And in the end, you have the formation of data spaces. Data spaces which could be high quality data spaces, so that then the activity of the AI tools afterwards could be simplified. And we should avoid the garbage in, garbage out syndrome, which is often affecting all the projects of AI for manufacturing. And in our experience, 80% of the time of projects in AI for manufacturing are about data and how to make the data suitable for the further analysis. A second approach was about product service systems. And this was done by Carlo Lacanino for the European Open Science Cloud. And he made a very interesting speech about the concept of quality, and especially how it is related to the quality, for instance, of our everyday products, like a bottle of wine, and how the data sets could make sense, could be fit for use, fit for purpose. And he explained that we have to consider three main dimensions. One, which is the inherent quality of the data, and the data set life cycle, also considering the time dimension about some data. The second should be the application, fit for purpose. But the third is also the stakeholder subjective judgment about what quality is. Is this data for me? Does it fit for purpose, for my purpose? And this is something that we need to consider, especially in the domain of product service systems. By the way, you know that in the Digital Europe program, there will be two actions about data spaces for manufacturing. One is about dynamic asset management and predictive maintenance, which means smart autonomous factory. And the second one is about dynamic value chains. The aspect of data spaces for product service systems or product portfolio is something which is still in its infancy, and it is in the Horizon Europe, not so much in the Digital Europe, because we really need to work a lot of it. As I said, hyper-connected factories, which is the risk for data spaces in manufacturing in hyper-connected factories. This was addressed by John Soldatos from the STAR project. The STAR project is a project ICT 38, which means AI for manufacturing. And they are using blockchain basically in order to assess data provenance and data traceability, and also to provide countermeasures to adverse attacks, to cyber attacks to data in the value chain. As long as you are hyper-connected, then of course the risk to have attacks is much higher. And so you need really to put countermeasures. This is what the STAR project is proposing. Algorithms, an architecture, and some tools, which will be then uploaded to the AI for Europe platform, as Michela said in the previous talk. Another point that we addressed during this session was the point of synthetic data. That is, we need in many cases, also for the manufacturing sector, to generate synthetic data in order to have a disposal data which are fit for use and fit for purpose. And the point is that there are several approaches in order to do that. And the Examinai project, which is again a research and innovation action in AI for manufacturing, is really addressing the point of generate those synthetic data from real non-public data sets. And this is something that it is a real challenge, and it is something that, in my opinion, is very useful for the manufacturing industry. We concluded the session of the 13th of May with a poll. And this poll was inspired by this communication of the Commission of 2018 about guidance on sharing private sector data in the European data economy. And as we have shown in the previous slide, there are three main models also for the manufacturing industry to share data. And we should make incentives for the manufacturing industry to use these three models. Model number one is open data. That is, how can the manufacturing industry contribute to the open data movement, and which are the challenges and the barriers. Second is data marketplaces and data monetization, which doesn't mean necessarily to be paid, because we have several other business models, for instance, barter models. So I give you your data and you give me the results of your elaboration of data. And there are also some other business models which are not really monetization, but it is creating a network of business between manufacturers and, for instance, AI solution provider. And then we have the most diffuse model, which is data exchange in a closed platform, the usual supply chain in the manufacturing. We posed some questions to the audience about open data, which are the most important recommendation and action that you would take. And the audience was equally divided into two aspects. Aspect number one is more about business, and it is manufacturing companies should embrace open innovation models. So they should involve also people which are not just engineers, which are not just in their companies, but they should really open up their innovation model, not just those who are producing consumer goods, which is quite natural that, of course, they put the innovation also in the hands of the final consumers. But also those companies which are like automotive, aeronautics, which are a very tradition of engineers, but maybe sometimes the enlarging the basis of the ecosystem for innovation is an advantage also for these companies. And second is something which is more technological, which means creating synthetic data sets for manufacturing and to have models, tools, and platforms in order to create this synthetic data, so that to avoid some confidentiality problems. The second business model is data marketplaces for manufacturing, and we had a very decisive position of the audience about industrial data platform respecting data sovereignty principles. And this is the recommendation that our community deems is the most important one, that is to go on with the actions that you already seen in previous presentation about integration of IDSA, Gaia-X, Fireware, BDVA in the DISBA. And so this is something that it is also confirmed by our constituency. Last, we asked the question about closed ecosystem and closed manufacturing networks. And the point was to promote and implement multi-stakeholders AI data spaces. And also this was a subject of one of the interventions this morning. So sectorial data spaces are okay. These are the embryonic data spaces, but we really need to create synergies and interoperability between different sectorial data spaces inside the manufacturing, but also from the manufacturing with other domains like, for instance, mobility, energy, and healthcare. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Sergio. And now next speaker will be Herman Pauls, Principal Business Consultant at the TNO.
Okay, my name is Herman Pauls. I'm working as business consultant within TNO, and I'm commercial responsible for the whole data sharing and AI portfolio. TNO is a large company comparable to the Fraunhofer Institute in Germany, VTT in Finland, RISE in Sweden, I just learned today, focusing on R&D and bringing innovation to the market. And I give some examples during this presentation. We are very active in data spaces and AI. We are board member of the relevant communities. What I really want to highlight is smart connected supplier networks. Also, the previous was on the slide deck as well in the manufacturing industry. That's an operational data space. I always said data spaces, it's not paperware, it's not proof of concept. it's already operational, you can do it. And the simple version 1.0, you can simply build it. We did it, done it, and let's commercialize and grow and not only discuss and move to the next topics. So that's about smart connected supplier networks. And I think one of the next wave is federation of data spaces. And we already started proof of concept due to our experience with smart connected supplier networks. The big challenge we have are there other operational data spaces where we can federate with. So if you have any operational data space, I love to federate if that's feasible. And of course, we are very active on top of that in delivering AI on top of that. And I fully agree with the previous speaker. AI is useless without data. So getting the basics right, you need access to the data. And I think one of the challenges all in manufacturing, mostly the data either have silos within your company you can't access, but moreover, it's a cross company. So getting the basics right, first the data space, and then you can deliver AI on top of that. I will focus on the Dutch AI Coalition, just brief. Dutch AI Coalition is about 400 companies. They have a sectoral approach and about 10 sectors are involved, and they have some what they call horizontals, and one of them is data sharing, because they already realized 3 years ago, you can discuss forever, but getting the basics right, having data sharing across sectors, that's really crucial. And we delivered many of those reports, proof of concept pilots. And the good news is all the results are publicly available. And one of the reports was published just a few weeks ago about federation of AI. And there I will have the focus of today. So this is the report. You can download it. The reference is over here. And if you need more information, you can contact me. My contact details are in the slide as well at the end. It's about how to federate data spaces and focusing on two aspects. One is the intra data space, so within a data space. But of course, many of those applications don't stay within a data space. You also want to do it across. So it's also about inter data spaces. So how are we dealing that within and across data spaces? And on top of that, say there are other additional topics popping up is, for instance, dealing with sensitive data. Synthetic data is one of those aspects. You have other privacy enhanced technologies like multi-party computations, federation, for instance, bringing the algorithm to the data instead of bringing the data to the algorithm. How are you dealing with those kind of configurations? So as mentioned, the document is set up. What about, say, how are you going to set up AI data spaces? A reference guide for inter data space, so within a data space, and a reference guide for inter data space, so intra and inter data spaces, and some reference implementations. And this is the first release, and we have regular updates of the documents based on the real experiments, what we are doing. And of course, say, the world is not stand still, topics evolve during time. As you might mention, say, that for interoperability federations, you have different levels where you are discussing. And I think that's also quite well known. It's about on the technical level. It's not around interoperability on technical level. You need it on semantic level. Semantic level, do you understand each other? And do you have the similar language? I will always use the example. I'm green. You can trust me, but everybody has a different interpretation of what's green. Then you have on the organizational level, how are you organized, what is your governance, and of course also on the legal level, say, if you want to have secure data exchange, but the data becomes in the public, what are you going to do and where do we meet in court? So what are the legal constraints where you can really share your data? That are the different aspects which are covered both inter and intra data space. We also looked at, say, the IDSA data space configuration and the different roles. I won't go in detail today, but for AI, you need some more specific roles as well related to AI. So we enhanced the data space model with some AI ingredients, and you can read in more detail in the report. And what I think is also interesting is that you have different levels of combining AI with data spaces. On the one hand is simply sharing the data and your AI algorithm stays within your company. That's the simple level of data, combining AI and data sharing is more, say, the data sharing and not the AI sharing. The next wave is also the algorithm sharing. So sharing algorithms across companies. That's, for instance, like federated learning. You bring the algorithm to the first hospital, you learn about, say, the medical diseases. You bring the algorithm to the second hospital, learning somewhat more, to the third hospital, etc. And basically, say, you have a kind of common interest that you have a good algorithm without sharing the underlying data. A next level of AI sharing is third-party processing. So you're not doing yourself, but bringing external companies doing the AI processing. What are you going to deal in that area? And the highest level is also, say, network cloud-based AI. So you can imagine that in the future for connected cars, etc., the AI processing is at the edge of the network. So you also have kind of, say, the telecom cloud infrastructure, which is involved. So we looked at the different levels of AI integration with data spaces and of course, say, the first level, what I already mentioned, data sharing, that you can do at some level, data space 1.0 is operational. The next levels is still in development in different stages. So we did proof of concept. In some areas we did pilots. Although, say, getting access to real data is sometimes also a head burden and takes you 6 months or at least 1 year. You might have similar experiences. So my conclusions, I think one takeaway, we discussed already for 5 years about data spaces. The first data spaces are operational. So it's not paperware, you can do it, it's live, kicking, and in manufacturing, more than 400 customers are really happy and more than 10 service providers are connected. We are already starting with federated data spaces, but basically the main message is we are looking for other operational data spaces, and our aim is next year to have federation with Gaia-X, for instance. And the further roadmap, I already mentioned about integration of AI. I think what's also a big trigger for data spaces, what I'm realizing, I've now many discussions about the product passports, because a huge area of EC regulation is transparency about the value chain. And I'm definitely sure that all those competitors don't want to share their information. So the need is a huge drive for secure data exchange. And I think that product passport might a very interesting application on top of those data spaces. And it's coming quite soon because there is a huge regulation coming up in that area. And as I mentioned, say, integration with privacy enhanced technologies is also the next level. And I fully agree with the previous speaker, say, quality is key and remains key. So thanks.
Thank you, Arman. And then we will continue to Martin Serrano from Insight Center.
Thank you very much. So good afternoon. I am in between the launch and my presentation. I will try to make it interesting. Yesterday, well, sorry, my name is Martin Serrano. I work in the National University of Ireland, an Insight Center. And yesterday I came around midnight and observed a couple of things that I want to bring your attention because it's about trustworthiness today and AI. So I look at the taxis and shared taxis. So I was imagining immediately collecting data. What is this about? Is it a Uber? Is it a Lyft? No, it's a taxi that can bring many people to the same locations or different locations at reduced prices. So I am willing to pay. After midnight and 50 people waiting for taxis, I am willing to go. Should I trust the driver? Because they are just bringing people to the shared taxis, right? So I started to look at, I need a receipt. I asked him. He said, yes, sure. I am a validated taxi. So, and I saw people in the taxi. I said, okay, I can trust this guy maybe, because there's more people in the taxi. And then all this is about creating trust based on the elements that you're collecting and observing, but also validating, right? So let's see if AI works in this way. So my presentation today is about demystifying trustworthiness. So everybody look at AI as a black box. Everybody talks about these application domain areas, and probably my experience or my contribution in this panel is the experimental part. So assisted intelligence, automated intelligence, augmented intelligence, and autonomous intelligence are those scenarios that are very well aware in every of the domains in the sectors, obviously helping people. At the end, AI should be resolving problems of people. That's why we need to trust, or we need to generate trust in AI. Now, we have changed the perception of AI lately. So AI is not only these machine learning algorithms that can help to resolve problems, it's society getting benefits from technology. And in this pyramid, obviously we need to define and we need to understand what trustworthiness is about. The what, the how, and the why. And hopefully by the end of my presentation, you will have answers for that, or at least you will have a conversation during the lunch to answer those questions. So I'll give the first example on AI, trustworthy AI, is when you go to the chatbots. So many of you rely on Siri, rely on Cortana, rely on Google Assistant, and you really trust on them. You give away information, you put the Cortana, you put your device in the home, they are collecting data, they are listening to you, you really trust that they will not use this information against you. In benefit, you get services. Turn on the light, put your favorite song, make a reservation, book a place. All these are the exchange between trustworthiness activities. Obviously, it has a social impact because you get bookings. It has a business impact because you might get an offer or a reduced price. You might get this machine intelligence working on your benefit. And also you get this information processing because all this information is going to the web. And of course, there's an electrical and mechanical device. Now, what this brings together is exactly what we are representing in here, a collection of different domain areas together. So infrastructure domain, digital services, and data-centric. From my conversation, from my presentation, I will focus in the data-centric domain. Data science is my experience by practicing and theoretical as well. So let's start from the beginning on where the data comes from. So sensor devices, the web, your digital services, collecting all this data. Today we were having good examples during the morning. So when we start to collect this information massively and start to attach what we call timestamps, we create this data series, and then we have these data sets, right? When this becomes to be organized and some sort of orchestrated. Then we start to do more dynamic collection of this data. Everybody knows Twitter, everybody knows Facebook, and all these streams and all this video information. So we have data streams. When all this information becomes to be so massive and so impossible to manage by the human brain, then we need to start to use this sort of intelligent assisted technologies. And this is when big data comes into place. And last but not least, when we start to do analytics, when we produce value out of this information, all this big data is what we have this intelligence. All this is called the data continuum, right? So today, many people talk about this computing continuum as well. It's just a synonym of how we can use these terms. The reality is humans are not possible to process all this information. Yes, we are capable to take decisions. We love to get assisted by all these information systems and intelligence systems, but we are not capable to achieve that because we need to have processing capabilities, transformation of multiple data sets, situational awareness, semantic analysis, analytics, and also robotic elements to take all and to automate that one. We developed some sort of prototypes and some testing in our labs, and we are in a very practical side of implementing and resolving this what, why, and how, right? The point today is marketplaces. So today we're also talking about this, shall we trust in these marketplaces that are gonna put my data for sale? Should I get benefits out of these marketplaces, putting my data in this market? Can I get these different models that Sergio was explaining today on my own benefit or to a common benefit? The answer is we should have the basis of the information. First is where this is coming from. Second one, we leverage this one to a reliable marketplace, following probably the process that was explained today for relying on trustworthiness. And also we need to have variety and diversity, summarizing the federation aspects that we talked today as well, was talked today. And on top, what we are proposing in one of our projects is data as a service. Similar to data on demand, intelligence on demand, but in here is data as a service. Why? Because we need to answer several questions: security, identity, storage, commercialization, and payments. So these 5 elements is what will give us the trustability, the trustworthiness on AI. If we are capable to address all these challenges in our projects, in our solutions, then we will be kind of a certain, like in the similar scenario that I proposed in the taxi. Yeah? I was collecting data, I was analyzing it, I was taking decisions, and I was assisted as well. Because I saw people, I saw the taxi, I saw the level of the taxi. It was a taxi in itself, so I can trust. So all this about is just to bring some light. I'm transforming this dark black box into a white box, right? And that's why Shai also can help us on that. But trustworthiness is not something that you can get granted. You have to develop, you have to observe. And in our IT market project, which is a data-centric approach, we have developed an open source release or an open source project that address these 5 elements in a way that is easy to adopt or even to take out and embed it in another project. It's called i3 by the influence of intelligent, because it has to be intelligent, interoperable, because these open source elements has to be integrated, and integrative, because it can be into different elements in the different projects. Now, what we have used is precisely this data consumer and data producer element as a main model, and we have produced some standardization, some accountability, some legal agreements, some authentication, some verifiable credentials, and some access management. These columns, what give us is the trustworthiness of the system, right? And that's why in the moment that we enable all these elements, the trustworthy AI becomes to be valid. At the end of the days, we have to rely on the system, right? We don't want to compromise our data. We don't want to compromise the marketplace. We don't want to compromise any interactions that we have within technologies. So that's why we have implemented these self-sovereign identities. So still the human has the power to take the last decision or even to authorize the access to the data, and the right to be removed from this system. We also have the OIDC, which is the identity controller for this accessibility. And also we have the IAM, which is Identity Access Manager. So all these protocols, all these standards, which are in the standardization conversation from today in the morning with the, and also in the first presentation today in this panel, are implemented in here. So at the end, we are taking the lessons from the theoretical part and implemented in a practical example, basically. So we are also using other standards in terms of interoperability from W3C. We're also using the IETF as a standard for payments. So this is the most popular standard when you are going to pay by PayPal or any online system, basically is following the standards. And all this is kind of the value proposition that we have to validate that. So if you notice, I didn't come to present a project. I just came to summarize the assets and the opportunities that we have with AI and trustworthiness. And everything has been implemented in this project is open source and really to collaborate. It's between the same kind of a group of projects that has been released for data sharing and single digital markets. So essentially it's an upper layer for commercializing data assets that match very well with the AI projects, because at the end it's all about data, right? And with this one, I conclude my presentation, but I give the answers for the 3 of them. So why we have to trust in AI? Because we have benefits, we can produce better services and better quality for humans. What we have to do in trustworthiness is precisely these 5 pillars or the methodology that we're explaining today. And the how to do that one is obviously following these steps to implement and deploy, make it interoperable and integrative in the same sense of the technology that has been designed. And I hope I recovered most of the time for our lunch, and I will be here for any questions or any doubts that you have. Thank you very much.
So much good information in such short time. Thank you all. It was so interesting to sit and listen, and you can think of questions, because I will start first, and then I'll ask Michela a question first. Is about, I mean, we are now talking about trustworthy AI. How can we make that? We have seen that people has done a lot of systems for making decisions easier, but still it's not as used as it could be. What do you think is this something we can do? Do you have a good example of someone that, how we can make people use systems that have trustworthy AI to make better decisions?
Oh, well, is it okay? Can you hear me? Good. So, well, I mean, of course, if you, for example, if you select, I mean, we have worked quite a lot on fairness, right? So if you have a system that does not provide fair decision, and in principle, these can be kind of, I mean, caused by data, I mean, by data polarization, then of course the decision that you take are, I mean, are not good decisions, and this may hinder also the trust that a person has in an AI system, right? So it's very difficult to I mean, for me, we are still far from having an approach and a common methodology that will ensure that, I mean, data and AI systems are trustworthy, because we still do not have a methodology for, you know, even assessing, measuring how fair is an AI system, how much fair is an AI system. And with fairness, I mean, is easy, but suppose like explainability, right? So explainability is very difficult to measure. How, I mean, how do you measure if a system is very explainable or is kind of, you know, explainable? So so the thing is that we really need to push for this approach. Do you want to have some like examples, or
yeah, I mean, often if I make a decision, it's often based on a legislation, something that my mother told me when I was young: don't eat mushrooms in the woods. Experience that I have experienced or other. So I mean, every decision a person takes is in a context, and if we shall make decision making easier and use maybe a system that's based in Sweden, move to Italy, do we have the same culture context? How
Absolutely.
can we trust them?
Yeah. That's I mean, that's a fantastic question. So in the sense that, I mean, when we talk about trustworthy AI, we are talking about some specific features that the system should have for being more transparent, more you know, fair, and so on. What you are talking about is like, what is the personal, I mean, people, for example, do not decide rationally, right? So while AI systems in principle should do, but, you know, I mean, on the basis of what? The cultural part is extremely important, the social part, the personal part is extremely important. And for this, I think that, I mean, this is I think it's a kind of a different topic, but I very much believe that we need to take into account like a social perspective, human perspective in AI system. But in this case, you need to have data that you know, measure, I mean, that kind of represent this human perspective or social perspective, and also you need to integrate these into models, for example, and decision models. That's really a very difficult topic, but it's I mean, what has been defined by the Commission with trustworthy AI is something that I think is easier, like, you know, trying to adhere with the specific dimensions that are at least defined. I mean, this is a very good question. It's a kind of a holy grail of AI, I would say.
Maybe, may I add a concrete example where we are working on? It's called skills matching. So it's matching, say, the vacancies with people who are looking for a job. And what you see is that the AI algorithm has less bias than the recruiter, but still there is bias. So it's also a kind of, say, what kind of realistic approaches do we have about the fairness of the algorithm compared to the humans who are now dealing with those algorithms? And that's really, say, a kind of hybrid solution, but still in that area, I think it's also, say, like automated cars. AI is driving better driving a car than a human is doing, but is that fair? And I think also those kind of more, say, high-level ethical questions, what do you expect and what's realistic? Now we are expecting kind of black-white, an algorithm should be fair, but it's not a human is not fair as well.
I would like to argue on this to complement more than be in disagreement, because AI has been developed or invented or reinvented by humans to emulate or to try to imitate the human brain, right? Trustworthy AI is precisely to assist humans in decisions. So it's different from the AI perception. And explainable AI is precisely to clarify and demystify via ethical, via practical, those elements that are in trustworthy and AI. So following these three different approaches or three different definitions, in these examples, we should not be making the mistake of trying to compare how the humans will react in a trustworthy situation. What we have to do is take the trustworthy AI as an element to help me to take the best decisions, or to not to take decisions basically as well, because can be a danger element, right? When we talk into machines, the machines are not capable to make this analogy or make these comparisons. What we decided to program them, to prepare them to take these alternatives. And I think today we saw examples as well by manufacturing, by the project that has been presented today, that is not imitating the human brain. It's precisely taking decisions over manufacturing data, over marketplaces data that can be assisted. So that's basically my argument.
I think that's a good point also to really, because I see that maybe to use AI more is to be more precise on what we should use, because I meet a lot of people that thinks that AI will take over and make decisions whether I should have a glass of wine or not. I mean, that's maybe not the issue that we shall use it for, more to have decisions so that we can make a wiser decision in all areas. So I think we need maybe more examples on that in the future. I have a question also for Sergio about, you talked a lot about manufacturing, and now, especially in the northern part of Sweden, there are lots of new industry that works with fossil-free steel and things like that. And the small, medium-sized companies that are subcontractors, they have difficulties in that. You had some good examples. Do you meet this, when you meet small, medium-sized companies and they are subcontractor to big companies that maybe have big divisions that work with research, how do you see their situation? How do you see that they can use this new, a new tool of AI data?
Oh, okay, good question. So the point is that the manufacturing industry is really evolving. And so hierarchical supply chains, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 are disappearing. And also in the mindset of the large companies, there is a more important approach towards innovation with partners and not just hierarchical relationship. And this is something that it is also at the basis of the SCN network in the Netherlands. That is, we don't have a original equipment manufacturer which is dominating the scene, and it is really imposing standards and imposing knowledge to the supply chain. We need to have something which is less hierarchical and more peer-to-peer. And this is also why we have data spaces. And data spaces are inherently decentralized and distributed. And so you can, it is not an evolution of the data lake where all the data are centralized and in one place. And this is also what Herman said about federated learning. That is, we should also think to move the algorithms towards the data and not vice versa. And this is something that we are in the manufacturing sector that we are approaching in order to favor SMEs. And the last point, in my opinion, the best mechanism for SMEs to be involved in this is digital innovation hubs. And I insist that this has been a very important pillar of the communication digitizing European industry of Günther Oettinger in 2014. And since that, Europe is really leading the scene in worldwide about involvement of SMEs and how to structure the knowledge and the services of digital innovation hubs. So I believe that this interaction between digital innovation hubs and data spaces, which was also mentioned by one of the speakers, is something that it is really important and disruptive for the manufacturing, and to give really SMEs the power to have knowledge also in the relationship with large enterprises, with multinational enterprises.
Thank you. And I have a question also for Sebastian. You said, I think that's something that very appealing to me, that we should be standard setters, not standard followers. Do you have some kind of, can you elaborate on that?
Well, I mean, the phrase was really coined by Thierry Breton when he was presenting the new standardization strategy for the European Commission. And to some extent, this is something that has already started. A good example is GDPR. When it was first introduced, people said, oh, Europe is shooting itself in the foot and becoming the kind of laggard on the worldwide stage because they are far too restricted with their data. But as it happened, GDPR turned out to be an example that other trade blocs in other countries followed. And I think a very, very similar chance or similar opportunity presents itself for AI and also for data handling within AI. So if we play our cards well, and if we produce good standards in the sense of being practical, being actionable, then we do have a chance of both European regulation, but also European standards becoming role model for the way that AI and AI data is handled elsewhere in the world. So I take the phrase really as encouragement for Europe to have, well, for us in Europe to have the confidence of our convictions. And if we say, well, we do want to take a different route, we don't want to take the Chinese approach to AI, we don't want to take the American approach to AI, we shouldn't really see that as something that is somehow constraining us, but as a genuine third way that we can map out and take with some confidence.
Definitely, we should have more confidence. I have a question to you, Martin. You showed the kind of stair that you can elevate on different methods when you started easy with data, and then in the end you came to what Herman talked about, federated learning and maybe a natural language processing. And if we are, Europe is often said as the leader of industry, and that we are good at new technology. And I think that you made a great presentation on what customers do you meet? Do you meet these small SMEs, or who are you meeting? Who are you helping with this process or this?
Yeah, we need to understand that it's an ecosystem, right? In Europe, we have not this notion of creating ecosystems. We create initiatives, and I have seen over the years many initiatives in different domains that grow, but they don't mature. So basically, we need to now take the next step and maybe focus on this maturity. What I meant in this data continuum is precisely the evolution of all these opportunities. So when we have data that is coming from different stakeholders, could be individuals, could be data processors, could be companies that they are generating this data, and they're pushing this one towards a more organized or even produce of data sets that are more organized or orchestrated, and then you give it away to another third party to commercialize it, which in this case is marketplace. They will be the responsibles of producing money, and then you will benefit on this process. Why? Because now we're establishing all these mechanisms and technologies that will allow you to have the self-sovereignty, the distributed consent, the approval for all these transactions, the smart contracts. All these things are going to support all this ecosystem, right? Because at the end of the day, it's not me that produces data responsible for getting the benefits. And one more puntualization here that this morning was mentioned about the data being the oil of the 21st century. Yes, I mean, it's the oil, but if we don't have refineries, we will not get the benefits. In the same way we have the petrol, the oil, and until someone refine it and transform it into petrol or diesel, then we can get our engines running. So this is the type of ecosystem we have to be aware. And with this data continuum that we are promoting and implementing from a practical point of view, so we can see how these opportunities can arise and grow and mature. Because at the end, these ecosystems or these initiatives should be transformed into ecosystems to have these particular benefits to different stakeholders. So the answer to in short is, can individuals be part of these benefits from data? Yes, if they are attached to a specific ecosystem. Those companies or data processors will benefit and distribute equally or in different portions to the participants? Yes, because this is what will be defined in the contracts with data protection. And those large companies can also have a play on this ecosystem. Yes, I mean, if they are part of this marketplace ecosystem, they will benefit. In which percentage, in which difference will be, I don't know. So this is something that we will need to experiment, and in the same way the Americans did in Silicon Valley, promoting entrepreneurs to have opportunities, and maybe 1 in 100 was successful. So maybe one SME in 100 will be, or in thousands will be successful. But this is still the answer to take on. What trustworthy AI, what AI is going to promote is that there are more business opportunities. This is what I can see coming, basically.
Yeah, Herman, I mean, you must work in ecosystems since federated learning, then you are kind of, you have leveled up on this stair, because I meet companies that have their data in their hands and in their heads, and they don't understand how to transform it to ones and zeros. So federated, I mean, is the companies that are into federated learning, are they less afraid of trusting AI, or is it still an issue, or have they kind of boxed in what they are doing and doing it with maybe not real data, but synthetic data, or?
Yeah, maybe say some different aspect, because I love say what you're mentioning, say data is the new oil. Then I thought, say, but we need the roads in the end, say, before the cars can drive. And in my opinion, the data spaces are kind of the roads, say, building the ecosystems. And I think that I see so many use cases where the big problem is we can't access the data, there is no secure data exchange. And I really say, because in the end, I saw say there are operational, it's not that a hard job, it's more say joining forces and let's do it and not discuss it in all different ways, but it's a kind of enhanced internet. It's a kind of basic need what all those SMEs and companies need. And that's also related to that federated learning. I think the benefits of federated learning is that the algorithm is coming to your data, so you don't have to give your data to somebody else. But still, people are afraid, what does the algorithm, is the trust of the algorithm, and is there no leakage of my data? That's still an area where, and with all those sensitive data, when I have those projects and pilots, it always takes 1 year before the legal departments and say agrees, and then still for a pilot it might be say a lightweight but full-fledged. And there it's also say about the legislation, etc., because they are really say fines are really a headache for many of those companies, and I fully understand. So there is also no room or freedom to experiment and show the benefits. And on the other hand, all the data is given to Google, Amazon, etc. So that's so where nobody cares about giving away their data. So it's also
because you get services in return.
You
have
ambivalence of say where we are dealing with those kind of say having different measures.
No, definitely. Is there a question from the audience? Yes.
A quick question about federated learning. At a glance, it seems quite interesting. However, it has been demonstrated to have a very large attack surface from a security standpoint. It clearly can transmit sensitive data between the data holding nodes and the master node that's updating the model. And the model itself may be designed to identify the data by definition. And we've actually explored this in the health context. I'm from EGI. I was wondering if any of you can speak to research projects that are addressing these specific issues and trying to come up with solutions.
At least what I can mention, because anyhow, if you're getting information out of the data, at least there is always some leakage. Because otherwise it has no purpose, because you learn anyhow something, but you can enhance the security message. So we are currently also looking in combining technologies like privacy, like multi-party computation and federated learning, just to assure they have a higher level of confidence. in the end, say, if you don't want to have any leakage, keep your data with yourself. Nobody has access. That's also, it can be a quite valid approach. Is if that's your business model, yeah, but then say, stop talking about data spaces. But on the end, it's always a kind of balance and a risk assessment. And that's what companies do in the end. You make commercial decisions. Is it worthwhile, and are the benefits higher than the risk I'm coping with? So it's also to be realistic. Zero risks, yeah, then stay at home in your bed. Then you might have zero risk, although that might be risky as well.
I think federation is also not only learning, it's also management, because at the end is in these multiple ecosystems or multiple opportunities that we will see coming from different markets, especially single digital market explains that we should have not only one market, like multiple markets that should be coexist. And then from a technical point of view, it's called orchestration, but from a more kind of a human-driven approach is federation. So when all these interactions exist, there should be some kind of a regulations on top of that. And we're not talking about here policies. We're talking about systems that understand what are the different needs, system that allows different stakeholders, like individuals, to go through the system, or companies to go towards specific conditions. And all this federated environment is the next wave. So I think in something we agreed in this point now, because federation is something really relevant, either at the learning level or at the management level. And of course, there will be ecosystems. I mean, today the commission was mentioning about verticals, right? That has to be leaders or pioneers on all these practices. And federation orchestrations and all these single digital markets needs to go with this way. Yeah.
Thank you all. And one thing that I learned is that it's really important to have something to eat. So I think we thank the panel with an applaud, and then we will go downstairs. I don't know, do Anna have some information?
Yeah, thank you. Big applause for Jeanette and for the whole panel. I just have a few comments for you. Don't go, Sebastian. So Sebastian mentioned before, we have a very good liaison with CEN-CENELEC Joint Technical Committee 21. They are going to produce standards. Here, there is a lot of knowledge. So I say, Jeanette, Michela, Herman, Sergio, Martin, everyone here, help us to bring requirements and knowledge to the people who are working in the standards. And also, let's join forces. We have the Task Force Trustworthiness of Industrial AI. You were talking about the great work of the ICT 49 projects, joining forces also around that topic. So we really need to keep the collaboration going. It was a fantastic panel. Thank you very much.